Let's talk.
Giles Brown.
History for tomorrow. Inspiration from the past for the future of humanity. It's based on a TED Talk. It's brimming with ideas and insights, described as a welcome, important and clear-eyed view of the understanding of how the past can help us better prepare for the future. It's by Roman Krznaric. I think I got that right, but I'm probably thinking about 50%, but I'd say that Roman joins me live on the line. Roman, apologies for getting your surname wrong again. Good morning to you.
Good morning to you. You were 99% right, which is almost better than my kids can do it. So thank you.
Tell us a little bit about why you are eminently qualified to write history for tomorrow.
I don't know if I'm eminently qualified, but I've done my best. So this book, History for Tomorrow, is about what we can learn from the last 1,000 years of history to deal with 10 big crises facing humanity. The climate crisis, risks from artificial intelligence, threats to democracy, issues around migration. So I think nobody can really be qualified to cover all of those topics. But, I have done my best. I'm a political scientist really by background, but I've had to stretch my mind into looking across the world at all the examples from history that can give us hope that things can be better. Because, often when we look at the past, we focus on all those warnings, like everything that can go wrong, like, colonialism and fascism and stuff. And of course, we need to learn from that. And that's all captured in that famous aphorism that those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. But I think, why don't we try and focus on the good stuff as well as the bad stuff? See what can help us through the turbulence of our times.
Now, you see, you are a man absolutely singing from my song sheet here, because and the listeners will be striking their heads against the wall going, oh, here he goes again. But, I'm that worst sort of creature, an armchair historian. I love and people go, why do you get into history so much? Why do you love it? It's because it teaches us so much. And it's easy to go, oh, well, the thing about history is that we don't learn anything from history and it's written by the way. And it's not. It's this living, breathing thing that has clear signs to how we can deal with present circumstances, because the human condition has always been the same, Roman.
I think that's absolutely right. I mean, if you go back to ancient Greece, people were worrying about life, being anxious about death, wondering about how to fall in love and make their friendships work, just like we are today. So we're the same people, but of course the institutions are different, and that's what we can change. And we can also, relate to each other in different ways. We can practice the art of conversation, all these things which knit our societies together, because that's kind of what we need, amongst other things.
I've just had this wonderful idea of the Greeks sitting around going, the problem is those Carthaginians coming across from Tunis on small boats. That's the problem we've really got to face.
Well, actually, I almost think the opposite. I think it's really, of course, immigration is one of those hot topics, whether it's in Spain, where you are, Germany, the UK, where I am. But look, think about where you are right now. As you know, back in the 9th, 10th, 11th centuries, the south of Spain, the ancient Islamic kingdom of Al-Andalus, was a place famous for its relative tolerance of Muslims, Christians, and Jews living together. And that's not to paint it as a perfect chocolate box Spanish tourist board, peaceful coexistence, the period known as the convivencia, the living together or coexistence. But people managed to get on together pretty well, even with occasional outbreaks of violence and everyday tension. So as we know, Muslims and Christians might play music together. Jews and Muslims might have a game of chess. People mix together in the public bathhouses, in the marketplaces of Cordoba. In the 11th centuries, Cordoba was a city with 500,000 people. And at that time, Paris and London only had 20,000 people. So people might say, oh, all those people coming over on the boats, today across the Mediterranean. But actually, there are these periods of history where we've got on really well together. I don't know. What do you think?
You've just hit all of my boxes, run off to the one, Roman, because you get me going on the Al-Andalus and the coexistence, but also it wasn't a Disney chocolate box sort of everybody holding hands into the sunlight, which people try and repaint it. And I can go on about the quote-unquote reconquest of Spain until the proverbial vacas come home. However, it is important to look at the fact that there are no easy answers. So, for example, with that whole thing about the Caliphate of Cordoba and the coexistence and, the Jewish population in Lucena being able to practice the whole thing. But it wasn't like, you could slap each other. There were tariffs, there were taxes you had to pay, there were certain rules. And so therefore, we can't look for there are no easy answers to any of the things that you've pointed out, Roman, but perhaps they are good starting ground rather than just to throw up our hands in the air and go, things were easy in the 70s or whatever.
Yeah, I think absolutely right. Because I don't think history provides blueprint answers, like in a kind of a Marxist sense that, you can find definite laws or patterns in history. But I think history, the point of it for me, I don't know about you, Giles, is to kind of open our imaginations to what might be possible. So as you said, in Spain in the 11th, 12th century, in the Al-Andalus period, it was knitted together partly by a shared language. But I think one of the cool things about it was that what the historians tend to say is one of the reasons people got on reasonably well from different backgrounds was they mixed together in cities. Cities are actually a brilliant social technology for enabling people to get on together. It's not always perfect. Look, if you live in the rough housing estates of Paris or the barrios of East LA, and where there's police violence and so on, life's not perfect, but it's a pretty good way of getting people to meet together. I mean, if I think of my son, right, his local football team, I live in the city of Oxford. It's got like 150,000 people. His local football team mixes together people of different backgrounds and cultures and stuff. And there's no better way, really, of getting people to hang out together and to become tolerant and empathic together. So one of the lessons we have there is about cities. But of course, we can't just draw lessons from Al-Andalus. So if you think about how is it that you get people from different backgrounds to get on together, you could also draw lessons from, say, London in the late 18th century. In the early 18th century, when the coffee houses from Turkey suddenly arrived in London. And these coffee houses, there were like 2,000 in London alone in the year 1700. And they'd have these communal tables. And you would sit down and talk to strangers, right? And they'd also have the printed matter of the day, pamphlets and periodicals, and you talk about the radical ideas, anti-slavery or republicanism. But, imagine if your local coffee shop today had a communal table where you would naturally speak to strangers. This is the kind of thing that we need to be doing to create more tolerance.
Now, here's the thing, because I'm glad you've talked on the coffee, because I'm a coffeeholic, but also the thing is, the coffee houses were meeting places where you could discuss radical ideas you could put the ideas out on pamphlets in a coffee house, right? No editor, no publisher. And that, for me, Roman, is the prototype of the internet, because everybody gets together, everybody's got these wacky ideas with no editors and go, look at that, that's what I think. But as opposed to where you're sitting in your bedroom or wherever you do your online surfing, talking to yourself, at least at the coffee house, there was people could get involved face to face, and it's much easier to have a conversation or to listen to somebody and have your ideas, perhaps horizons broadened on a face to face meeting in a coffee house than it is sitting behind a cooler bulb going, oh, well, you're just the loony left or you're just a far right fascist or whatever.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And that's why I actually spent 3 years of my life, after I left academia, my life as a political scientist, I went and worked in this community project called the Oxford Muse, spelled M-U-S-E, like the Muses of Greek mythology. And it was a charitable trust which was invented to create conversations between strangers. And what I did, I used to organize these things called conversation meals.
Yeah.
And inviting people from different backgrounds along, different ages, class backgrounds, religions and so on. But instead of giving them a menu of food when they arrived, we gave them menus of conversation with questions about life on them, like, what have you learned about the different varieties of love in your life? Or in what ways would you like to be more courageous? Or how have your priorities changed through the years? It was like the opposite of speed dating. You talk for 2 hours, not for 2 minutes. And it was about finding our common humanity face to face, as you say, but, and maybe I disagree with you a bit on this, I think we also have to work out how we're going to have these kind of conversations online in a way that isn't all about nasty trolling and talking about the loony left or the crazy far right. And there's actually some really cool projects that do this. And let me give you just one little example. In Germany, a few years ago, a newspaper, Die Zeit, the Times, started this project called Germany Speaks. And they got people just to fill out a basic online form of their political views, like a survey. And then they matched people up to talk with their political opposites about issues like migration or climate change or anything, like on a basic kind of online platform, a bit like kind of Skype or WhatsApp or something. And you just talk with your person whose views you might radically disagree with. And what tends to happen is that people don't end up agreeing with each other, but the sort of sharp edges of their views get worn off. They start listening a little bit better. And the amazing thing is there was this study done of this, and over 100,000 people have taken part. In 90% of cases, people talk with their political opposite for more than an hour. And in 30% of cases, they'll talk for more than 2 hours, and it reduces intolerance and stuff. So that kind of project can work really well if it's kind of curated or managed well. So I'd say, like, let's not abandon the digital world, but let's also keep the face-to-face going, and let's in fact try and expand that.
But you can, I mean, and also the fact is that because if you are, opposition, your pessimism sells, yeah, radicalism sells, if you like, in your media, on your algorithms. It's much easier to break everything down to a 20-second soundbite about painting mini roundabouts or small boats or whatever you want to say, and that has the, and we perhaps we. I'm sitting here in southern Spain, right? So I'm getting most of my news feed from a large TV, so flat screens you can't see here, but also on my social medias. And from what I've been getting over the past couple of weeks, I won't be able to walk out this. If I was at your front door now, A, it would be very worrying for you, but two, it seems that I would walk out and find nothing but people wandering around in St. George flags, painting roundabouts, and basically chasing people of any who look a little bit different down this high streets, shouting, all sorts of stuff. That is the amplification of what we're seeing, and that has a cause and effect, doesn't it, Roman? So we need to recognise our shared humanity, and also we have more in common with each other, hopefully, than we do against each other.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and of course, there's a lot of toxic social media stuff going on, and of course, the way the algorithms work is exactly to, as you say, sort of favor the nasty stories over the cooperative stories, to get people listening to news feeds or watching news feeds which just exaggerate what they already think, and then we become a more polarized and divided society. And there's a real question, how are we going to get over that? And if I just actually think about my street, if you actually turned up on my door, what you would see, in fact, up and down the street is a little notice, literally, if you walk there now, a little notice saying St. Mary's Road Street Market next weekend. That's my street. And this is a really interesting example because during COVID, on my street, people didn't talk to each other very much, but we formed a WhatsApp group to help people and deliver food to elders and stuff. And that WhatsApp group has survived. And now it's a way that we share tools, or somebody's got a kid's bike they don't need anymore, they give it to somebody else, and we just organize our local street market. But this is a way that people from different backgrounds actually get together on a face-to-face basis. Everyday stuff, sharing a quiche pan. But actually, that's a very political act, I think, in our times, especially in our times you're talking about, where there are the St. George's flags being rolled out. Because actually, when people become reliant on each other, interdependent, that's when we start creating societies which can survive through the ups and downs of, whether it's wildfires in Spain and floods elsewhere, or, increasing energy prices and stuff. In the end, we're going to need each other, right, to get through things.
So, I mean, going through history, you've seen, because people go, oh, well, it's inevitable, it's coming. The book looks at also societies who have beaten the odds, societies that do prove that that might see existential threats. And, like I said, we're saying, we've seen empires crumble into dust with feet of clay, but small societies, so what? Do endure. There is a common humanity, a common morality, and I don't mean by saying, you're wearing odd socks or whatever, but, the sense of that we are all moral human beings. Humanity, humanism, as it goes back to and here we go, the ancient teachings of Greece. Those types that you can take, you can go back, there are some ideals we should, and then we are intrinsically programmed to adhere to. So, I mean, how, what's your take on that one, Roman?
Well, I'd say that those ideals or those morals, and the way we're connected to each other it's actually burnt into our DNA. It's part of who we are. So let me give you an example of our natural capacity for empathy, right? How it just develops. It's part of our biology, and this is why you see it all through history. So my kids, right? I've got twins. They're now 16. It was their first day of going to A-levels today.
16-year-old twins, Roman. I mean, that's a big ask for a start.
I know, and I'm still alive somehow.
Indeed, yeah.
But look, when they were really small, when they were like 2 years old, before their capacity to empathize and step into each other's shoes to develop, you get a situation like this where my son might be crying and his sister would go and comfort him with her favorite toy dog, which was a kind gesture, but not much use to him. Fast forward a couple of years when they were like 4 years old, when my son was crying, his sister would comfort him with his favorite toy dog. Okay, that is the mental leap of empathy. It's understanding what somebody else needs. And this develops naturally in human beings. So we are wired for empathy and cooperation and mutual aid and tolerance. Now, our institutions like education systems get us all competing with each other, right? So we need to learn how to bring out this side of ourselves, this humanist side of ourselves. And there's some brilliant programs that do this. In Canada, about 10 years, 15 years ago, there was a program started, an education program called Roots of Empathy, like the roots of a tree. And the way it works is this, it's for teaching empathy skills. And what they do is you get a bunch of kids, like 5 or 10-year-olds, you sit them in a circle, you roll out a green mat in the middle of them, and you plonk a baby in the middle, a real live baby. And the baby's there, not alone, with a parent and an instructor for the program. And they start talking about the baby. Why is the baby crying? Why is she suddenly looking up at the mother or father? What they're trying to do is step into the baby's shoes, the art of empathy. And they use the baby visit for then talking about, well, what's it like to be a kid bullied in the playground? Or what's it like to be a family whose house has been burned down in Spain or who's sleeping on the streets of Calcutta? So it's all about expanding kind of beyond the ego. But I think we need to learn, you can learn empathy like riding a bike or driving a car. And that's what we need to realize.
And here's the thing, and without getting all Whitney Houston, I believe the children are our future, etc. No, I didn't think I'd drop that one. But, I've strangely enough, about 4 years ago, I got invited by my old school to go back and do the Leavers Day speech. It is a strange world in which we live, Ronan, when I'm giving that, right? I think I was put there as a warning to the new generation. But I think it's very easy for us to go, oh, Gen Z, oh, millennials, the whole thing. And I don't think that we give, and there'll be people throwing their George flags at the wireless, I don't think we give our young people enough credit for what they've been through in terms of they went through a pandemic. I don't think, I'm born 1968, so I'm a kid of the 70s and the 80s. I don't think, with enough hair gel, Nick Kershaw albums and The Cure to get through, I don't think I would have got through a pandemic without playing far too many Dungeons & Dragons games on my own. And yet the youth came out of this one remarkably. I mean, in Spain, it was mayhem during, as you know, the lockdown was quite something. But it's very easy to discuss, to dismiss young people and go, oh, well, they're all just on their smartphones and whatever. And yet they proved in that thing of which we did not speak 5 years ago, that they actually have empathy. They have a community spirit if it needs to. And they do get, we caricaturize and we demonize our young people. And that's not a good thing.
Oh, I totally agree with that. I mean, even if you think about before the pandemic, who was it that was leading the new climate change and environmental movements? It was young people. And it wasn't just Greta Thunberg. There were tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of kids, including, my daughter, going onto the streets and actually saying, look, I want to be a good ancestor. I want my future to be better, but also the future for the generations to come, the citizens of tomorrow. And, let's be judged well by the future for what we did or didn't do when we had the chance. And of course, the pandemic came along and it closed down a lot of those, political actions and things like that. And then our, kids of that time, like my kids, had to go through a really tough time. And now they're just coming out of it. Yet they are going, back into, the reviving, climate movements, which are not going to go away. I mean, they come and they go. And also being active on other issues like trying to get AI under control and stuff like that. So, but on the other hand, I don't think we should just say, right, kids, it's up to you. As my kids say to me, look, Dad, you were the one that were flying in airplanes all over the place in the 1990s. Didn't you know about the climate crisis? The Rio Earth Summit happened in 1992. And I said, yeah, I knew, but I didn't know, It hadn't kind of got into my bones. I don't sort of fly for pleasure now or anything like that. I've changed my tune. In fact, we've just been on a cycling holiday through Croatia and went there by train. But I think we're all kind of responsible for this. We can't just say, right, it's up to the kids. But I don't think they are all just on their smartphones. And so I think the smartphones are a way that they're learning about new stuff, and they are going to find themselves on the streets as well, because as we say, the wildfires aren't going to go away. The floods aren't going to go away. The climate crisis has a slow violence to us. It's coming to get us unless we seriously change what we're doing.
There's one thing here, one of the examples, which how can we take from the 18th century Japan to understand now, because people say, oh, well, these are all nebulous sort of terms. It's like, when in doubt, former phalanx of Roman legionaries. So what can we take from 18th century Japanese reform to help boot the economy? Come on, Roman, dazzle me with this one.
I will dazzle you, of course. I mean, it does sound pretty obscure, doesn't it? 18th century Japan. So there's a chapter in my book which is all about this, and it's about how we tackle kind of hyper-consumerism, all the plastic we're dumping in the oceans, and that's ending up cutting down the rainforest and stuff like that. Can we actually get ourselves off the juggernaut of consumerism? Because if I go to my local shopping center, right, that's where everybody is. They're not in church or they're not anywhere else. They're shopping. They're kind of having a good time. But if we continue down that route, we already know we're using 2 planet Earths annually in terms of our ecological footprint. So have there been any moments in history where we've managed to do anything different? Can we actually have a more deeply sustainable economy? And boom, boom, where you go to historically is Japan in the 18th century. Because, Japan, if you think of the city of Edo, today's Tokyo, right, in the 18th century, it was a huge city of over 1 million people, so far bigger than London or Paris at the time, or Cordoba or Malaga or wherever. And the amazing thing about it wasn't just that Edo or Tokyo was huge. It also operated what we would today call a circular economy, where almost everything was reused, repurposed, recycled, refurbished, really deeply sustainable. So if you had like a kimono made of precious cotton, and at that time, it's important to remember Japan wasn't trading much with the outside world. So they had shortages of cotton and wood and stuff like that. So if you had a kimono, once the cloth began to wear out, you'd then turn it into pajamas. You'd wear it at night. Then you'd cut up the cloth and turn it into nappies. And then you'd use the leftover cloth as cleaning cloths. And then you'd finally burn the precious cloth as fuel, right? Or in Edo at the time, there were thousands of sustainable circular businesses, people collecting candle wax strippings to be remolded, down and out samurai repairing old umbrellas. People would even come to your house and pay you for your human waste, which they then sell as agricultural fertilizer, right? So it wasn't a perfect society. It was feudal. It was patriarchal. It was a military dictatorship, but economically, it was probably the world's first large-scale example of a low-waste, low-carbon ecological civilization. And I think this is where we need to be moving today. And what Japan teaches us is it can be done, at large scale. It's not like a tiny society. I'm talking like over 1 million people.
Yeah, because, I'm interesting to say that, because, again, we go back to Spain. If you think about the pig, everything is used apart from the squeak, basically, or the squeal, as the saying goes, right? Because they use everything. And
Spanish, you're going to eat your pig's ears.
Exactly. And also, Spanish rural society, dirt poor, but so everything is reused. I mean, everything is reused. And you could say that, waste on a large scale is a problem of a society that has too much. But obviously, you've educated me today, Roman, because I didn't know about that done on a city. You can understand the macroeconomics of a pueblo, of a village, but not of something on that scale. And that is something we should be using.
But I think, for me, I'm not saying, Japan, again, as I said, isn't a perfect society. But the point of learning about this history to me is to also ask yourself, well, what is there in my own community or my own region or my own family history we can learn from? Because, as you say, you can go to the pueblos of Spain and see this, almost inherent deep sustainability. Or people can think back to the Second World War, maybe grandparents or whatever, who would waste nothing.
Rag and bone men coming around, that whole situation, isn't it?
Exactly. So this kind of a deeper, sustainable form of living isn't crazy. It's not so far from our own lives. We almost just need to open our imaginations to what's possible. In a way, that's what my whole book is about. I'm just saying, look around the world. It doesn't have to be this way. We can do better than this. But we probably need to cooperate a lot better than we currently do.
What are you hoping that people will take? Is that the quote, as the Americans say, the message that you want them to take from your book?
I think one of the messages is that. I think it's also one of the messages is that we need also disruptive movements to change the system. I think you don't really get fundamental change, unless kind of people go onto the streets and shake things up a little bit. And of course, Spain has had its own history of this, the indignados, which then turned into Podemos. And, these are not perfect solutions and so on. And people may or may not agree with that. But if you look through history, if you look at the big changes like the civil rights movement in the United States, it had disruptive movements, people in the streets, the suffragettes campaigning for votes for women in the UK, but in Finland and other countries, people on the streets. Spain has an amazing history, of course, of neighborhood organizing going back to the 1970s and before that. And look at, for example, cities like Barcelona, which are really leading the way through often quite radical activists who are, creating new city blocks which are sustainable and making streets pedestrianized and all those kinds of things. So, we do need to shake things up a little bit. And look, I have to admit, I'm a kind of person who likes sitting in old libraries reading books, but I found myself lying on the street with my teenage daughter blocking the road in front of Parliament in London because I'm exasperated by the government's glacial pace of action on things like the ecological crisis. And I know it annoys commuters. I know that. But our inaction is going to infuriate future generations even more. I can't think of a better way to be a good ancestor. So I think, look, there are lots of lessons from history, but I think a little bit of disruption probably is going to get us a long way, especially if we want to be remembered well. And look, there are millions and billions of people who are going to inhabit the future, let's at least bring them into the conversation. Let's not just colonize their future by dumping technological risk and ecological degradation on them. And I think history can help open our eyes.
The book is called History for Tomorrow. If people want to find you online, where's the better? By the way, listeners, go to the TRE virtual bookstore, click on the front cover. It's sitting there proudly, and by a well-known distribution service named after a South American river, yes, the Orinoco, it will be going its way to you. If people want to find you online, Roman, where's the best place to find you?
They can go to my website, romankrznaric.com. They can look at my TED Talks. They can just look up History for Tomorrow. They'll find the book. And maybe it will give you something to do on a late Friday night when you've come back from the bar and you've had your sangria. You can read a bit about Edo, Japan, the 18th century. Why not?
Well, I think there are worse things to do with your Friday afternoon, but you wouldn't be drinking sangria in the evening row of shade.
No, you're right. Actually, I used to live in Spain and I didn't drink sangria in the evening. That just slipped out badly. I'd probably be having... I don't know what I'd be having, an oloroso, even at the wrong time.
Oh, well, but hey, you've shown willing, and that's the main thing. The greatest journeys start with small steps. The book is called History for Tomorrow. Roman, thank you so much for your time today.